Konkinak semdol kake mofaseda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations, podcast about EVE Online. I'm Matterall. With me today is Carneros.
Good morning. Are we on?
We're on. And also Elise Randolph.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. Today's guest, he might be a little busy. I think he's actually fighting in Fate the Ballus, is Hedliner.
Hello, hi. I'll try not to be too quiet. We're just about wrapping up.
No problem. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. Like I said, he's in the middle of a battle deep in Fate the Ballus. He is the FC and leader of Pandemic Legion. Well,
too bad we can't shift to the war correspondent camera that shows him in the field wearing like some long military trench coat and directing people with gloved hands. That'd be cool.
We're standing on a hill, like, I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Nuke him. Yeah.
Well, Carneros, tell us what we're going to look at today.
Okay. Good morning. Coming back here for a second. We're going to start with a news item section, as we generally do. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the conflict between Legacy Coalition and Winter Coalition. Stuff going on down there. The occasional juicy kill. Interesting things happening. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the CSM Summit, which starts tomorrow. We're going to talk about, we have a little gossip segment. I'm not sure when to talk about that, but I wanted to get anyone's thoughts who have them on Kenshin moving to Initiative Mercenaries.
Oh boy.
I know. And then we wanted to talk for a moment about peak concurrent users and participation stats in EVE Online. Maybe look at what's going on with Plex, what's going on with EVE numbers, talk a little bit about the competition out there. And then we're going to have a section of closing remarks where we each attempt to give the audience some tip they may not know about EVE Online. That will be our close. We've been doing it the last few shows. It's a lot of fun.
Sounds good. Elise, are you ready to go?
Yeah, of course. I've already got my tip ready. Hopefully no one steals it from me.
I doubt it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching the video stream, either the video on demand or the live stream, you'll notice that our man Elise Randolph is not on camera today like he usually is. And that's thank you to Hurricane Dorian. But if you're on a podcast, this won't make any difference for you. But it's just fun to know. I tried to arrange it so that we would be doing the show while the hurricane was arriving, and Elise would be on camera during a dramatic moment, but that option was not available to us.
Yeah, the hurricane slowed down very rudely, so instead of hitting today, it's hitting on like Tuesday, which is just the worst time for a podcast. So
yeah, totally. Uncooperative hurricanes. We should nuke them. All right, but aside from politics, let's get into EVE politics. Why don't we just jump into the news then?
Oh yeah, there was an interesting moment. I don't know if Captain McLeod can put the lost mail up on the screen. There was an interesting moment yesterday in a wormhole where a loggerhead went down. You don't very often see loggerheads lost mails. We'll put it that way. But this group came into J165940, a wormhole, and basically did the wormhole style of request PvP. And the locals formed up a fleet and undocked to fight them. And apparently, I don't know if apparently a unwritten rule of wormhole combat was broken on this particular fight. But apparently the invaders had somehow stashed some earlier ships in there in advance, and were able to escalate past the normal amount that a wormhole can bring in. So they surprised the locals with more forces than would normally have been in a consensual PvP engagement of this sort. So, or I don't know if they just saw a loggerhead on field and got excited and activated more troops than they would have done. But at any rate, they overwhelmed the unwritten rules of the engagement, broke some kind of space Bushido honor, and killed a beautifully fit, very powerful in situation loggerhead. If you aren't familiar with those, Elise, can you explain to people what a loggerhead is?
I hope I'm right. It's the Garissa's Fax, right? So it's like a super tanky Minakawa. Wait, no.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Minakawa on steroids, sort of.
There you go. So it's just this really beefy thing. And, the setup that you talked about is how these wormholers broke some code. This is why I love wormholers. They play such a weird version of EVE Online where they have like space honor where you're not supposed to bring a certain amount of ships. I just love it. And ever since we were looking at the economic report, where it turned out that wormholers, who make up like such a small portion of the EVE player base, were pulling in 12 trillion a month in loot. I'll never look at them the same way again. Like they're like a quarter of nullsec right now, or a little bit more, like a third of nullsec in terms of how much money they're pulling in, and that's why they can fly these blinged out loggerheads.
Well, the thing about the Bushido, and that's kind of a joke that they play with certain etiquette, certain rules, and if you violate those, it's kind of like, hey, you're violating our rules of combat, our rules of engagement. But EVE Online has established itself as total war, meaning you use every arrow in your quiver to win, whether it's psychological warfare or all or nothing, taking the fight when you can have overwhelming force, or just sitting out fights you don't, using boredom as a weapon. These are things that I think are kind of like Western EVE Online, because one of the comparisons we made with the Chinese server, which is like a replica of, that's the only other server that's like EVE Online, I think, because China has different rules on internet and things like that, that they had a different culture. So when their players came over, they mentioned in an interview that we did with Wind Spirits, the leader of Fraternity at the time, he said that the Chinese players were like pro athletes, like they were conditioned to be excellent in circumstances that were defined. And he said that Western players were different in that they're more like warriors, in that it's total war. Whatever a warrior needs to win, he's going to use in order to win. And that was one of the clashes of culture.
Nice. But yeah, with a ship like a loggerhead, you may think, okay, I'm risking a very expensive, it's probably the value of a Titan in a fax, roughly speaking. And you're risking this on field in a wormhole. But they've fit it really, really well. It does more reps than a normal Minakawa will do. It's got more tank on it than they normally would have. And it's in a contained environment that should have a limited number of ships. So your risk should be lower. And, it's in that situation, it's damn powerful. I still managed to take it down.
One of the funny things about it is, so it gets like better stats and an extra mid slot, but really the only like big bonus it gets, if I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it's to the logistic drones, right? So it doesn't get like a super amount of rep. It just gets this extra mid slot, which is actually quite crucial, and extra shields, armor, and everything, and extra cap. But the big bonus it gets like this like 10 or 11x multiplier for logistics drones, which is something that people generally don't think of, when they see these facts on field. They're not like, oh, let's kill these logistics drones. They're like, oh, let's nuke this guy out or pin him down or like avoid him somehow. So I wonder if the people fighting this loggerhead actually had the wherewithal to kill the logistics drones too.
Can it use the drones while in triage?
That's a good question.
I think it's probably a dumb bonus in general. However, it's extra tank and it's extra mid slot, and the extra budget you're going to assign to fitting it means you can put, faction capital remote reps on it, and you can actually do more reps with the damn thing because of the fittings you're going to install.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also at the top of the game in wormholes, right? Because you can't have super capitals. They cannot exist inside of wormholes. They can't get in, and they can't be built inside of them because it's not sovereign space. So the best you can get are these type of capital ships, dreadnoughts, carriers, and these force auxiliaries, faxes. And that means that having a faction version is really the best you can get inside of a wormhole space.
All right, let's take a break from this for a moment and welcome back Hedliner. Did you win?
Hello. Yes. We're just getting off the field now. Yeah, we took the opportunity to stop Faith Abilis once. Yeah, I'm sitting still. To raise ADMs in their new home in Faith Abilis, so we're waging a little bit of a campaign against them at the moment, which is proving to be quite good fun. But yeah, we saw some fairly what looked like easy kills, so we decided to grab them.
All right, well, we'll let you go back to your fleet for a moment. Keep going on the news. This is funny to me. I don't know why. Okay, so another thing that happened this week is that the Imperium leadership used some of the Imperium's upper management and resources to pull together a bunch of research on EVE peak concurrency and EVE population trends and activity levels. And they put together, my understanding is they pulled this together for the CSM reps to use to take to Iceland for the new CSM summit that starts tomorrow in Reykjavik. But they debuted some of the report on Saturday at the weekly fireside chat that the Mittani gives. And he got up and said a few remarks. He invited Tuzzy to stand up and say a few remarks because Tuzzy was sort of the lead manager of this piece of research with some helpers. And they talked through some thoughts about it and then said, this is what we're going to send off, with the CSM reps. And they actually, the activity of talking us through it in Fireside gave them a couple of ideas. I don't want to go too deep on this because we're going to talk about it later in the show. We'll have some more, but more to talk on this. If you saw the Meta show this week, which is a different show on another network, they covered some of this in a different style.
You can say the network name. It's okay. We're not in competition.
I know, Imperium.news. I'm just being goofy.
Yeah.
I haven't even had any champagne this morning. Oh, and in other news this week, CCP dropped a little bit of a bomb about 2020. Who got surprised by this news?
I was very surprised by that. Very, very surprised and upset.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who expected it. I think everyone was surprised. Not everybody was upset, but everybody was surprised.
You see, the thing that annoys me, right, is mixed messaging, because for years now, CCP has pushed EVE Vegas as being the premier EVE Online event, the flagship. It's got unlimited scalability. It's, it's got a massive draw, and then, suddenly, without really any rationale that makes a great deal of sense, they're like, oh, by the way, we're going to move it a couple 100 miles down the road to another place for no reason at all.
Yeah, they're moving this one in October of 2019 is still going to be in EVE Vegas. But next year, 2020, they're moving it to San Diego, California, on the border with Mexico. It's a beautiful town. It's got gorgeous weather. If you live in Iceland, you appreciate San Diego weather. As someone who moved from Iceland to San Diego, I can attest to that.
Seaside.
But it doesn't have as much going for it in certain ways. It's sort of I think of it as the diet version, less flavor, but, it's nice.
Well, I know we'll get to it a bit later, but I actually think it's an improvement. because I don't think Las Vegas has like, it has a lot of flavor, but you may not like the flavor. In other words,
True.
But what
Yeah, that's it's just well, I mean, we'll go to it later, but it is just super weird and super strange. But you'd be surprised at how many people that I've encountered that have said, "Hey, I'm kind of glad because I never wanted to go to Vegas before." These people had never gone to begin with, but they're like, it's just not my style of town. So
that's the thing. That's the nice thing about them adopting this world tour thing, which I think was actually quite good, is that there's a little something in there for everyone, right? Where's the equivalent of the big, shiny, crazy event for 2020 that could match Vegas? I haven't heard anything about Eve Macau, so...
And it's also like a big departure from what they have done in the past, right? Which has been to enable previously player-run events. So like Eve Toronto was Eve North before, which was a player-run event for many months. Eve Vegas, or many years, Eve Vegas was formerly a player-run event. So all the events that were before that CCP decided to go to were always player-run events. And I could be wrong here, but I don't think there's ever been an Eve San Diego meet.
No.
So it's a pretty big departure.
Monthly meetups, but there's nothing like what you're talking about. The closest thing they've ever done before was when TwitchCon was in San Diego one year, and CCP hosted a little meetup the first night of the con. And I helped with that. I helped organize it and went down for that. It was a lot of fun, but it was just, we went to a brew pub. We had a group that got there early and had dinner, and then we had a bunch of people taking over the bar and drinking beer together with CCP devs. It was fun, but it wasn't one like this. Yeah, Matterall, I'd say yes. And then then Goon Swarm, or the Imperium, I should say, the Imperium opted to make this sort of a little bit of a win-win for the EVE player base by reactivating some old resources to say, we will run a player-run EVE event in Las Vegas in 2020. So never fear, if you really, really wanted to go to Vegas and hang out with your EVE buddies next year, you will be able to do so. So now you'll have your option of hitting both, or just the calmer of San Diego version or the crazy EVE Vegas version.
So I guess we'll take on this topic now. So don't expect more of it later. But I did want to say that was really interesting, what you said there, Elise, that, or was it Carneros, that CCP enhances already organized player events, and that kind of takes some of their burden off them. It's almost like, hey, if you guys can have a proof of concept that there are enough people in your area that want this thing, then we'll go there and enhance it by giving it support and bringing some CCP devs there and embracing it. And that's what's happened in the past. But this to me seems like the World Tour was different because they basically went all around the place. They said that they, being Falcon, the community lead there at CCP, said that they had a great time doing that, and they realized there's a lot of people and a lot of demand for closeness with the company in different parts of the world. But this is different. This is, hey, there is no player meetup in San Diego that they're going to grow. This is us saying we're throwing a convention from scratch in this city, and San Diego's next year. The year after that, we don't know where it's going to be. It's
2020. They also had another thing that they said, which was we thought the St. Petersburg, Russia one went really well. We're going to move it to Moscow and do a bigger version. They also said that.
Yeah. Well, and so it tells me, first of all, San Diego is 2020. 2021 is anybody's guess. It could move back to the East Coast or wherever. It's going to move around the United States. It's not going to be in the same place over and over and over again. And I think, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the interesting things of like tackling it this way is I think a lot of it has to do, frankly, with just personnel change, right? Because CCP Guard was always about enabling, like giving the tools for an existing, be it player events, in-game or out of game or anything like that, enabling that with CCP's help to make it grow. And so, I mean, he's gone obviously now. So maybe this is like kind of the not necessarily the new normal, because CCP still enables player events and players like that. But maybe this is like it's less of a priority to find an existing meetup to enable and grow like that.
Yeah.
I don't know CCP Curtis. He's the guy who plans the events now. Mm-hmm. You most recently saw his work in Finland, where he did the Eve at home.
There's something endearing about that one.
Yeah.
People found it weird. I found it like really endearing. Like I like that a lot.
CCP Curtis is great. I met him. They were scouting different venues not too long ago. I guess it was last year. And they had come down to Orlando, and they were like, hey, while we're in Orlando, we're going to hold like an impromptu Tiny Eve meet. We're just taking over this random bar in downtown Orlando. If you want to come, great. And like 60 people showed up just out of nowhere. So it was pretty neat. Got to spend an evening with 60 Florida Eve nerds and CCP Curtis and CCP Guard, which was a fun time.
Well, okay, so why did CCP do this? One of the questions people are asking. It seemed to have come out of nowhere, and everybody was surprised that this had happened. And so right away, as soon as it broke, we streamed. On the morning we have these every morning we have these streams, and talked to Falcon, who came on and said, well, we had done this tour and we found that there was a lot of people out there that wanted to have CCP come around. And, they've kind of done eVegas a long time, so it was time to move on. And the counter argument to that I've been hearing is this is an established thing now, Vegas. People like to go there to destination place. You can get wild there, and it was bigger than FanFest. So more people were going there than FanFest. My personal counter, and I'll let you guys comment on this yourselves, was that, one, I don't like Vegas, but that's just a personal thing. Two, it didn't feel like an Eve convention to me. It felt like a big ass party, and you had some Eve sprinkled on top of it, as just kind of window dressing. Like, it wasn't about Eve. It was about what happened after Eve. It was all the parties and stuff. So it didn't feel like a convention. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of morphed into that kind of thing. It's where Eve players would just hang around with one another, and the actual Eve information kind of is a backdrop, and it played second fiddle to the amount of fun that these groups were having. I know for PL, we would have like this yearly PL dinner with Pandemic Legion, Pandemic Horde, and anyone else that we want to invite that were like our bros. And we would fill up the restaurant, have 100 something people. And of those 100 something people, I'd say probably 60 didn't have a ticket to the event. They just wanted to come and hang out with their friends, right? So and build that way.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But I don't know. It was just a very oddly messaged, right? Because the messaging was, we wanted to spread the love. By the way, we're moving 350 miles away, right? But in reality, from what I gathered from people after the initial shock, it was not necessarily spreading the love geographically, but more in terms of the demographic. Because a lot of people came out of the woodwork and said, hey, Vegas doesn't seem like the city for me. I don't ever want to go there. I went there once for a convention. It sucked. I hate smelling cigarette smoke.
Oh my God.
I could take my family to San Diego, right?
Yeah, go to the zoo or something. Yeah.
And luckily the Imperium is like, hey, we're organized enough to take this event back.
Well, they had
get the most organized group in video game history and give them an event to run. I think they can do just fine.
Here's some speculation. Can we speculate? This will be something that gets thrown back at me, I'm sure. But if you look at it, you had the Imperium decided to do their own thing in a different hotel because they didn't like the arrangements that CCP was picking. And if I were CCP, I would have taken great offense to that.
No. They didn't do their own thing. They just elected to sleep in a different hotel than the actual main hotel with the event happening.
They didn't have sessions.
There was no, here's our own parallel event next to it. No, none of that.
Go ahead, Hedliner.
I think that there's some sentiments there that, that they liked it the way that they did it before, right? And I guess we'll see how popular it is when it comes back. I can imagine it'll be pretty popular. But for me, the main thing around changes like this is it's in keeping with everything else that CCP has done recently in terms of in-game changes, and I think that the changes that they've made there and the changes that they're making sort of to the out-of-game social element and the dynamics of how that's going to. There's no real clear rationale or basis for what they're doing other than that, we want to mix it up, we want to do this, we want to do that. And I guess to a certain extent, mixing things up or creating chaos or whatever it is that they want to label it in relation to certain things, that's fine. But they're not doing it in a particularly logical or informed way, in my view. I think they just kind of think, that seems like it needs a change. We'll throw that out there, and then if people like it, cool. And if not, we'll do something different next year or next expansion or next patch cycle. And it's not good. It pisses people off, I think, and it irritates me immensely. And a lot of more sort of players who are embedded in the game and who have been invested for a long period of time feel the same way. It's okay if you're new and casual and you're the kind of person who's just coming in to see if it's for you. But if you've played for a decade and a half, like a lot of people have, they don't necessarily like that. And I don't see why their kind of wishes should be subservient to new players or to CCP's whims, personally. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's all tied together in the same unsavory packaging for me.
So you're saying this is part of the bigger philosophy of disrupting veteran players' routines and trying to appeal to newer players.
It has the same unpleasant smell to it for me. Yeah.
Got it.
I will point out, we haven't mentioned this, but I will point out Eve FanFest Reykjavik is supposed to be back in 2020. So my understanding is they've got Harpa again, the main opera hall that we've used every year except one since the day they opened it. And then, although my guess is for 2020, there will be a little bit different dynamic simply because Eve will have moved their Reykjavik office from Grandagarður over to the University of Iceland campus. So that's still in the 101 postcode of downtown Reykjavik. It's still nearby, but in my mind, I'm not remembering how walkable that is between the new building and Harpa.
I think it's a walk. it's a bit of a stretch. But what I think they should do for 2021, just to keep keeping things fresh, and this isn't coming from like a position of being bitter or anything like that, because that's not at all what I want to give. Also, thanks to Pando for kind of raiding with his massive group. I think they should move FanFest in 2021 from Iceland to Greenland, just for the jokes, right? Like everyone confuses Iceland and Greenland anyway, so just host it in Greenland one year, see what happens. I don't know.
Do they have?
That's
I'm sure there's some sort of.
Is there a city there?
Yeah, I'm sure there's like convention area in Greenland. If not, we can build one.
Yeah,
just pull up a really big boat.
They did that already, didn't they? I don't know. That was necessarily the most popular thing they've done recently.
I know.
I didn't get to finish my conspiracy theory, but I'll just write it down somewhere instead.
I think my tangent may have cut you off a little bit there.
No, Carneros was very, very astutely muffling me from making a disaster happen. So.
Thank you.
So I'll follow his lead.
All right. Actually, let's change subjects for a moment. Let us move back to New Eden and move over to the right side of the map and go back to the legacy versus winter conflict. Hedliner, were you in a fleet the morning that I can't say morning because of all time zones and Eve, but the morning that the Vanquisher died?
Which time?
The second Vanquisher. Well played, sir. No, but
No, I was at work both times. I was just perusing various Discord channels, watching the pieces of his Vanquisher sort of spread across the internet.
you know, if you've ever been a leader of a group, you've always got that one guy in a group who wants to do crazy things with his ships, and he doesn't care if he loses them, and you just can't force him not to go off and throw himself into something like a pigeon on a skyscraper. So I can feel for the leadership.
Well, the thing, I have a couple of observations here. The first is that guy's clearly very wealthy, and if he's got ISK to burn, he should just come and talk to me, because I'm pretty broke. But also, like, this is, for me, I have feelings about this, because obviously you don't want to trample all over your line members and prevent them from having a huge amount of fun. But at the same time, when you're in a war which is pretty unforgiving, and there's certain smug factors attached to a guy repeatedly feeding a Vanquisher to the people that you've been at war with for 6+ months, it does have an adverse effect on your on like your line members on the other side. It'll energize them back up and make them feel like they're scoring some easy points, which is not necessarily the best thing when the other, like 95% of the time, you're probably slugging pretty hard to gain back ground or not give any.
Yeah, and the name of the ship was probably a couple of additional easy points there to give away. He basically said it something like, "You kids try to tackle this one," something like that. It was a Chinese slang, and it was a little bit condescending, and I think it backfired on him. He should have named it Obvious Bait.
And really, I think Baltec is to blame for this whole thing, right? Because Baltec is probably the most notable player, if you've played for a little while, that would always do his own thing on fleets. So he was in the CFC, which is a precursor to the Imperium. No matter what fleet doctrine they called, he would always bring a Megathron, and because it was his favorite ship, so he just brought a Megathron every fleet, no matter what. Could be Drakes, I'll bring a Megathron. So you can always count on Baltec to bring a Megathron, and eventually the CCP had changed battleships, and the Megathron actually became a viable fleet hull, and so they named it Baltec Fleet. So he became like pseudo famous, right, for just bringing his own shit to whatever he wanted. So now everyone wants to emulate him. I'm sure this guy who lost his Vanquishers was very inspired by Baltec.
Probably hasn't even heard of him, honestly. Yeah, I was in the engagement. I had a lot of fun. I did not get anywhere near the Vanquisher. My first information about it was the Lost Mail suddenly appearing in fleet. Oh, we didn't get to that. But there was a thing that happened. Well, it was a Sov-related contest with Entosis happening in a constellation, and Legacy invited Imperium if we wanted to send a fleet over to help them. And one of the Imperium FCs says, "Yeah, I'll bring a fleet." And he formed up, it was Eagles. I think we formed up Eagles for that. And I got in the fleet in a boosting Tengu. And we ran around in circles trying to kill people who were trying to do Entosis or something like that. We were running around. We didn't get to do very much. I think we killed one Minakawa and a couple of sabers, because sabers appear anywhere and you just shoot them. That's what you do. And then there were a couple random things. And then we find out that Test got a Vanquisher. And we thought, you guys couldn't let us get in on that? Anyway, it was funny.
Oh, they didn't let you get in on that?
No. It would have been my first Vanquisher kill.
Why wouldn't they let you in on that? They had it captured. They were shooting it. Why wouldn't they say, "Hey, come and enjoy this prey we just caught"?
It's exciting. You're there. Someone just handed you a piece of cake. Are you going to stop and say, oh, wait, let's bring all my friends to share my cake with me? No, you're going to eat the cake.
Well, I'm sure he was busy like making sure they had enough dreads to shoot it. And that's what it seemed like. It's surrounded by dreads. By the time you got there.
And like Hedliner was saying, it's like a big morale thing, right? So if you let your friends come and get it, then you're like, oh, you guys just blobbed, you're pets of so and so. But if you kill it yourself, then you've got a little bit more moral win on that one.
Wow,
I think also
perpetually shaken by that stigma that's attached to them, aren't they? So they don't want to feel that fire anymore.
There you go.
There was another factor too, and that was Elo Knight had a fleet that had just dropped in the far back dead end system of this same constellation we were working in. He'd seen Villy's alt in a hell in the system, or maybe even his main, I'm not sure. And they bridged a fleet onto that hell and tried to kill it. Somehow, as things happen in EVE, sometimes tackle failed and the hell was able to moonwalk out with a bunch of damage. But in the meantime, we got assigned to quickly go to that gate and block them from leaving through the only exit Stargate, which in a SOV contest that's going on across a constellation, you don't want your forces trapped in the last system at the end. That's a recipe for failure. So we had another thing we needed to do that was more strategically important than getting in on a symbolic Vanquisher.
Okay.
Anyway.
But I do also think like there's some psychological stuff at work that Hedliner was pointing out, that if Test is getting criticized for blobbing or always calling Imperium to come and help them, that this was a good opportunity not to do that. But also things seem to happen very quickly, so who knows if he had time to say, hey guys, we're over here now.
I will point out that there's a lot of stuff happening between those two sides every day. There's just been, the activity unfortunately is mostly AU and EU time zone. As someone who lives in US time zone, there isn't very much for me lately. But those guys have stuff every day, and the Imperium, doesn't send a fleet very often, just every now and then. But I'll be if it isn't fun when we do.
Isn't that always the case? And this is for Hedliner and Elise. Wasn't it always the case that battles or wars were kind of fought EU and AU? Like AU, Australian time zone, would set up stuff, and then EU would come in and destroy it.
I think historically, at least, Hedliner has got way more experience in the last 5 years than I do. But historically, the most activity has always been about 8 o'clock Eve time. So like just that sweet spot where Euros can still make it without getting too inconvenienced, and Americans are just kind of getting back from work. So if you want to fight for a timer, then like 2100 is generally what the timers that you wanted to aim for. And Australian time zone was always the lol, I don't want to fight, just hope for downtime to save me and no one shows up type thing.
What about you, Hedliner? What's your experience?
Well, I've lived my entire life in the United Kingdom, so I've very much rooted in the European time zone. But it's like in terms of alliances that I've been in or coalitions, we've always been EU time zone heavy, and there are less people around in the US time zone, and I think that's kind of the driver there. You got more where you have more people, you'll have more things happening, either geographically or over time zones.
So Test onlined a keep star in QLPX TAC-J and Detorid. And there was a rumor, I'm not sure a rumor, there was a spy or an espionage-related leak of maybe an Elo Knight ping that says something about why they didn't form for it. But they chose to let this one slide and just online and not oppose it. Did you have any thoughts on that, Hedliner? You would have done it differently.
No, it was way out. It was placed way out of China time zone, wasn't it? I was away the day it was placed. But it was at a time where they would have been unable to really contest it anyway due to not having enough people around. So I mean, you have to manage that message to your members, obviously, and explain why you do or don't do certain things. But I mean, I guess it's a no-brainer, really. If it would be like, the only other time zone skewed people I can think of are like one of the Russian alliances or coalitions from back in the day. It would be like, it's similar to time zone tanking, right? They can't be around after a certain amount of time just because they've got other things to do. So it's the exact same situation here. And if you wanted to guarantee that you'll probably get the structure online, that's the time to do it, right?
Let's make a mental note of the subject of time zone tanking, because this is important and I'd like to come back to it later. But I just want to point out that it really does occur and we really have to deal with it on a regular basis in EVE Online. Do you have any, Hedliner, do you have any thoughts on time zone tanking?
It's frustrating, right? It's very frustrating, and it's why certain groups are as secure as they are. And it's a very hard break against conflict, which is very, very difficult to get around. Because if you don't have the people, you know, there's only so many times that and we saw this months and months ago when Black Legion and Pandemic Horde teamed up to have a run at Branch. You know, they got into this pattern of having to alarm clock in the US time zone, and it's very, very hard to do on a regular basis to consistently ask people to show up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning or 2 hours before they go to work 3 days a week. It burns people out, but that is the only way around it, right? Unless you drop your own structures, but then that will limit the headway that you can make against other people unless you break them by baiting them into coming to shoot at you. So it's difficult, and it's something that I think is very hard to get around. It's something that CCP clearly has no idea what to do about, and they probably aren't even necessarily thinking about it as a huge problem. But for the players who are entrenched in 0-0 warfare, at least, it is a big headache to navigate around.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Hedliner was very polite to dance around, but like Sword Dragon, he's been around for since the beginning of the game, right? And his coalition has never been like militarily the strongest or whatever, right? Which isn't a knock on Darkness or any of the coalitions he was in before. But where he has tremendous value is that all of the Australians kind of want to be together, right? Because you need a critical mass in EVE Online. So he was always able to get the Australians, or at least recently in the last 5-8 years, to like listen to his banners, right? So he was the de facto Australian time zone guy. And so it's really hard to invade the guy that has all of the Australians because you could just set timers that only your coalition can attend, and then you always have this dominant force unless someone does a surprise alarm clock, which, as Hedliner was saying, is not sustainable.
So that's the secret to Sort's power, was his time zone, or was he powerful before then?
I mean,
Not really.
I hope I'll be a bit nicer. Like he's he's an established FC that's been around since like Delve 1 days, right? So he's been around forever. He's not a useless, powerless person, but in recent times, his coalition has always like punched above its weight and always been, someone that people wanted, like a jewel that people wanted to collect and to ally with, because of his time zone dominance.
Yeah, I was looking at Fraternity when they did their ballot for CSM. They put him at the top, I believe, or he was second to Gobbins, I forget. But he was way up there, and I was thinking, like, well, that's unusual. Why would Elo Knight put Sort Dragon way up there? And I don't know. The only thing I'd come to was that at the time, Sort Dragon had Australian time zone influence and that he could bring people to a fight, and they didn't want to mess with that to tip the scales between them and Test. Something like that. There was a geopolitical.
It's always weird.
Always a lot of balance trading, isn't there? But,
yeah.
I mean, like you say that, but Pandemic Legion is actually the reason that Sword Dragon did not get onto the CSM, which is actually a more interesting story.
Oh,
yeah. So I in the breakup when sort of the what are they called now? They're called GOTG, or they're called something else. When they kind of went their own way for whatever reasons, you know, when they didn't want to be friends with our coalition anymore, we decided, you know, the only way we could really strike back because of this impressive time zone tank is to exclude Sort Dragon from our ballot. And then, I mean, there are 12 or so active people that voted, I think, 12 or more in my alliance, and he lost by around about 12 votes. So we took credit for that.
Fantastic. So your 12 votes did.
Well, that's the way I look at it. That's my CSM story.
That is very funny. Speaking of this new CSM, I want to point out that tomorrow starts the first CSM summit of this new term. So it starts Monday morning, first thing in the morning in Reykjavik. The delegates are all traveling today or already there, getting ready, because you need a little time to get your time zone together, you know, before you're going to sit in all day long, concentrate all day meetings in a small room. There's zero opportunity to fall asleep in that chair without being noticed. Zero.
God, with jet lag too. Wow.
Yeah, it's not fun. Well, it's fun and not fun at the same time. But I just wanted you to all feel for a moment as you're listening to this podcast later on recording. They're probably in that room, sitting there, working their butts off while they're doing that. They're going to start first thing in the morning. You're gonna get like a break in the middle of the morning, maybe around 10:30 or something. Get a cigarette and a coffee. They're going to have lunch in the cafeteria. They're going to take another break mid-afternoonish, and then they're going to go all the way till basically dinner time. Then they're going to they might get a chance to go to their hotel for a moment, but then they're going to go downtown to a restaurant. They're going to meet over dinner with CCP there. And it's a working dinner. And then they're going to walk out of that and go to a bar somewhere if they want, or go crash if they've just run out of juice. But the people who go out for beer are going to have beers with CCP too. So it's valuable time. You learn different things over a beer in a bar than you do in a presentation in the conference room. Worth your time. So I just wanted to point out that this is going and have you feel the rhythm of it alongside what your daily life this week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Go ahead.
I think this is a really important CSM summit, probably the most important in a number of years. And hopefully CCP takes advantage of having a new set of CSM, well, a broadly new set of CSMs over there, and actually takes the opportunity to listen to them and to the messages that they want to feed back to them, regardless of whether they like them or are in keeping with what's happened recently or not. Because if ever there was a time that player views needed to be articulated to the people who are responsible for developing the game, it's now, and these are the people to do it. And this is the prime opportunity for them to do it. So let's cross our fingers on that one.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of kind of new people in terms of who they represent, right? So you've got Vili, which is I think Test's first CSM candidate somehow, who's engaged in this conflict, who kind of understands the inner workings of how chaos era PvP is working, right? You've got Gobbins, leader of one of the bigger alliances in the game, doing his thing. You've got Exuki, who's like a wormhole guy who can give insight on the wormholes, and I imagine he's going to have something to say about the rolling mechanics that CCP want to tackle. So, and then of course you've got like the goon block, right? Of like Innominate, Aerith, Merkle Chan. I think that's it, right? So, and you got Dunk Dinkle as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of really good insight that hopefully CCP can utilize very well on this.
Yay, McLeod with the great graphics. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
If you remember Jintan from last year's and several years other before that, Council of Stellar Management, he has done a little bit of a little series of interviews in preparation for this CSM summit. I'll go ahead and see if we can get them linked into Twitch chat here. First one he did was with Dunk Dinkle a couple weeks ago, talking to him in preparation for the summit. And then he did one last week with Omeka Gold. And then he did one a couple days ago with me. I put them in there. And he got sort of the other side of the table in his interview with me, what it's like on the CCP side in those meetings. And they're kind of additional color and flavor if you want to see that. And Omeka has some of his own views that you don't hear as many places that you might find interesting.
My view is actually that's quite dangerous, because I feel like his views are the ones which are resonating most with CCP right now, and they're not representative of the majority of the player.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that they take advantage across the whole spectrum of people on the CSM and not just sort of selectively listen.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's always been frustrating on the CSM from when I was on the CSM like a long time ago, and from what I heard from some relatively recent CSMs is that it's hard when CC pulls out these metrics to say, hey, this is what the metrics are telling us, and the players are trying to say, hey, well, the metrics only tell part of the story. Here's the other part to go along with it. And sometimes the players are right, sometimes the players are wrong, sometimes CCP is right, sometimes CCP is wrong. So it's hard to find a balance there to have like a constructive type of conversation.
And that's the thing, right? And I've said this many times when I've come on here or been on INN stuff, and I tell it to our guys all the time, or to anyone who'll listen, including CCP, which is that the only way they get around that kind of impasse of, or they write or we write, this is what the metrics say, is go and play the game. Which is something, and I've always been quite pro CCP whenever I've come onto these different things. But recently I've found it very hard to find ways to keep doing that, because it's sort of like, there are so many screamingly obvious things out there that they could pick up on. If they don't want to listen, they could pick up on them themselves by actually just like immersing themselves in one of the nullsec alliances, going and seeing what some of these big fights are like, or what it's like day to day, living with the things that they're changing around, like their light switches in the back office.
Here's an example. Let's say hypothetically, someone in the legacy winter conflict asked you to move some supercaps down from the north. How much are you thinking these days about the sinusoidal changes happening in 2-3 weeks, and the fact that it may be actually more difficult to move them back afterwards? Does that affect your thinking, your planning, or your evaluation of whether or not it's worth moving them?
Absolutely. It affects everything. It affects things like that, the hypotheticals, and it also affects like day-to-day, life, logistics, planning, suddenly the number of people who could potentially do logistics from one side of Eve to the other might halve, or reduce by 70% or something like that. And people have conditioned their set of characters to be able to do things a certain way over a fairly long period of time, sometimes, or in the short term at considerable expense. And then they're told, oh, well, actually, all of this stuff is just going to change in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks that, by the way, this is chaos, just adapt. And that doesn't sit particularly well with me or with anyone else, because it complicates the things that we're trying to do day to day. And a certain amount of that is okay, but then again, they put a lot of unnecessary frustration on alliance leaders, or the select handful of people that do the things that turn the cogs for an alliance on a daily basis. And it's a risky game to play, because if you push those people to such an extent with these changes that it's just not worth their time to keep trying to pick their way through them, and they go, then alliances will start to decline or fall to the wayside, and then large chunks of players may just stop playing altogether and go and do something else. And that's something that I truly do not believe they consider that when they go about thinking about what they're going to change.
Yeah, it is just mind-boggling to think about. There are probably 20 people that play EVE Online, and if those 20 people didn't play or weren't active, then you're talking about thousands upon thousands of players that wouldn't be doing things, right? So there's this concept that a lot of people say, hey, well, if he doesn't do it, then someone will step up to fill the void. And it's actually not that easy, right? So, I mean, you're talking about, look at alliance leaders in this game, and you will see people that have been playing for over a decade easily, right? So you can't just simply replace a lot of these people. Like, I know Billy isn't really technically the
Gigax
alliance
is
leader
the
of
best
test,
example,
right?
Yeah. Strip out the whole, but whatever happened with him, and the fact that he couldn't be around for various reasons, and his alliance shattered. Then he came back, and it magically got itself back together again, specifically because he wanted to play, and he was able to play for a short window of time. It's basically the same principle. It's just the drivers behind it are different.
Well, here's my question. Where did those CO2 guys go?
Some of them went to test, some of them went to NC, some of them went to whatever GOTG was back then. They went all over.
So at least if those 20 players that put all the packaging together to go out and do stuff, the FCs, we'll call them, the content creators, if they disappear, what happens to the players that follow them?
So for a while,
as an example.
So for a while, I think people will try and fill the void, and they'll do it for a while. They'll do it for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they'll either step up to fill that role, which I think is a very low percentage chance, or they'll completely burn themselves out and quit, and a lot of those players will leave, right? Like, so we've seen, I think Elonite is a really good example of this.
Yeah,
he has left the game in different areas, right? And his alliance, Black Legion, has completely crumbled as a result. And those players, some of them went to PL, or some of them went to Volta or other places, but a lot of them actually just stopped playing EVE. And then Elo comes back, and those people, they come back because he's got the passion. People like to fly near him. Like, people have just come to say, yo, I really like Elo. I don't like the way anyone else plays EVE. If he's around, I'll play. If he's not, then I won't. And just imagine that you tomorrow remove the Mittani, Gobbins, Hedliner, Sword Dragon, Villy. You just take them out of the game, and just to see what would happen. Maybe people will step up and
why don't they?
avoid, but
why don't, since they're all in a nullsec Discord together, why don't they all say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go on strike. Like, our leadership, we're going to go on strike and see what happens.
I think that's what a lot of the high sec, the war on high sec is about, right? If that meme ever comes to fruition, I think that's just going to be like, hey, this is what happens if we do this. But the dirty truth is that these people love to play EVE. It's like, it's more than a hobby. It's borderline an addiction, right? And it's not necessarily the gameplay. It's the people associated with it too. Like, you create these bonds that you don't want to leave behind, because EVE is still an enjoyable game, right? As much doom and gloom as the Chaos Era naysayers say, it is an enjoyable game. The reason people get so impassioned about it is because they love the game. It's not because they hate the game and want to complain. It's because A, they love the game, and B, they have a lot invested into it, and they want to see it continue to prosper.
Well, that, and you don't want to let, underneath all of those individuals that you you name, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have given up their free time to come and help support an agenda that's been set by those individuals. And it wouldn't be fair on them to just say, you know what, fuck, I'm going to prove a point, and I'm out for a week or two.
They feel a responsibility to their players.
Yeah, and it's not. We shouldn't. Those individuals shouldn't be put into that position either. I think those who are tasked with curating the game, let's say, and taking care of it on CCP's end should have a better dialogue with those people, and that's a two-way thing, right? It's on those individuals within the game, within these player groups, to want to have that dialogue as well. Personally, I would like that. I think that would potentially be even more valuable than the CSM. But it won't work without one side making.
It almost makes more sense if you're trying to get player representation among the organized empires, we'll call them, that you take their representatives, their diplomats or their leaders, and you put them on a council, because then it is a space council. It's an outlaw space council. Not just the RP aspect, but those are the guys running hundreds and thousands of guys. Those are the guys that you would kind of see on a council that basically was coming together like a United Nations kind of thing. That's interesting. But here's my pushback on the whole concept of CCP getting closer to the people who are basically entrenched, powerful people, is that you perpetuate that play style and that priority for that kind of stuff, developing to it, fixing their problems, making things work better as they see it. And they would give you honest answers, I'm sure, the players, because they want the game to be healthy. But it seems then at that point, you're really just saying this is what EVE Online is. It's about these organized groups in nullsec space that are harvesting and fighting for territory, ignoring a completely different thing that could be happening that you don't even know about.
So I think it's entirely possible to have a very holistic view of the game, not to sound like a hippie, but you can help new player retention and help veterans enjoy the game by doing some things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I'll always come back to this because it's kind of been rather massive in EVE's history, right? CCP rebalanced frigates. That's it. They just rebalanced frigates one summer and made them, instead of just these trash ships that you play in for a week and that niche people PvP in, they made it so they can have a role from day one, or week one, I should say, not day one. From week one, you could have a role in PvP. You could help out your friend in a meaningful way, be it E-War, be it tackle, be it whatever you want. And that gave rise to an alliance called Brave Newbies, which eventually went to Pandemic Horde. So you're talking about 20,000 players that were able to stay in the game and retain in the game and interact with EVE's story because you balanced frigates. And balancing frigates didn't have an adverse effect on the veterans of EVE Online. They liked it too. And it actually inspired them to go out and seek newer players, right? Because now there was a motivating factor to have these frigates on your side instead of the enemy's side. So instead of just hovering them up and making them a meat shield, as some people doomed would happen, they fostered these people and created giant organizations. So you have Karma Fleet, Brave Newbies, Pandemic Horde, all existing because one summer CCP changed frigates. So you can make these changes that can affect new player retention and have a positive impact on the veterans as well.
Well, be aware. There are questions you can that a game company can ask customers, and they'll give an honest response. And there are questions that it's not possible for players to give an honest response, because the hypothetical version of the question is not the same feeling that they'll feel when they're actually faced with the option later in the game, and they will react differently. and they're answering as honestly as they can at the time they answer, and they believe they're being accurate with their response, but their behavior later will be different. This is just a human psychology thing.
That's a good point, because I find myself a lot of times, because I'm pushing back so much to what seems to be like the talking in stations. A lot of people talk about how bad blackout is for the game and that sort of thing. And I find myself saying like, hey man, it's not that bad. You know, it's probably great for some people, et cetera, but I'm not experiencing it. So it's hard for me to be authentic saying like, I'm out there having a great time when I'm not out there having a great time. And I can't represent that point of view at all in any way that's fair, because I'm not I'm not under the same pressure they are and stuff. So I have to think about that. But what I'm getting at, Elise, is that thing that brought in players, then created Brave, later Karma Fleet and Pandemic Horde were splinters of Brave, or attracting the same people. That to me, if I look at it, I was thinking like, oh, that seems like it would be a really good thing. But was it a good thing because of the distortion in career path that created for people? You come into the game, you within 2 weeks are in nullsec, having basically living in the very dangerous outlaw space. Should your career have moved that fast?
Well, it's kind of like Manifest Destiny back in the day. Like you want to send people out west in this lawless area. You need people out there, right? Like you need people in the lawless area. So those people risked a lot, quote unquote, even though they're not really risking too much. But
they
it just so happens
to
that
risk by saying
exactly.
It's about pure fun. It's about just fun per hour and just stay classy. And so they immunize themselves against the discouragement that was going to hit them for being so new to the dangers.
The way I look at this, right? But these people, we track these people, or these people come and have a look at the game. They potentially are interested in the PvP element of it. That's what those groups are offering. It's very hard to break into PvPing successfully on your own when you're starting from scratch. And they were offering, a structure around it, a community, support network, that kind of stuff. It's probable that people might have found their way there sort of through other ways as well, other means. But ultimately, I think it is good. And no one was forcing these new players to come and do that. The opportunity was there. It was promoted and given. And ultimately, a material portion of those new players probably ended up continuing to play because of the groups like that which were developed. And it was sort of mutually beneficial, I think.
And I don't want to seem tone deaf or anything. I understand, because I read a lot of chat and the people who are poo-pooing some of these ideas. I understand that nullsec isn't everything of EVE Online, right? Like we make our nullsecers make a lot of the big stories, but they are not the only stories to be told, and they're not the only voices that should be heard. So that's not at all what I'm trying to say. But I am saying that you can make changes that are beneficial to everyone, right? HiSec definitely deserves some love. And one of the interesting things about, as Hedliner was mentioning, a lot of the people that came to the Karma Fleet, the Brave Newbies, and the Hordes, a lot of them were at least interested in PvP in the very beginning. And hilariously, if you're interested in PvP, it is really hard as a new player to get at it, because frigate PvP is actually the hardest type of PvP because it's the least forgiving, right? If you make a mistake, if you buffer for 1 second, like that one shot of your hull represents like 30 or 40% of all your HP that you have, right? So if you make a mistake, if you freeze, if you're not really good in the early parts of it, you're instantly going to die, and you're going to get clowned on by some of these people who are a little bit better than you or more experienced.
Plus you have to make decisions a lot faster because you'll fly right past things.
Yeah, exactly. Everything there's like so much like that can go wrong, and you have no buffer. Like if you wanted to get into PvP, the easiest way to start would be a battleship like a Hyperion, because you just have to like push some buttons and there you go. Yeah. You can push them late, you can push them early. Who cares?
Time to think. Yeah. Hedliner, you were saying something?
Yeah, I know. I agree with that more or less completely. And the thing is as well, it's like when you're doing it on your own, right? So when I first started playing, my best friend from school got me to start playing even. He took me my first day. He did something pretty smart, right? He took me around the forge to a level 1 mission, and he helped me run that with my Kestrel, and then he took me to a system called KBP7 in Providence, which at the time the gate was camped all the time, and his corp, having just left a 0-0 alliance, was having some downtime camping this gate, skirmishing with Severance and CVA, and he put me there. He got me a caracal, and he put me on the gate inside an anchored bubble, and they baited with me people to come, and then they would uncloak with their battleship, the sniper battleships and Falcons, and they would kill them. And I was immediately hooked, right? Because suddenly there were hostiles appearing, and I had to shoot at them, and then I died, and then I got a new ship and came back, and they explained to me what had happened. Whereas before, I feel like I could have just muddled my way through running level 1 missions in the Forge on my own, and I eventually would have got it, or been able to read like a website that would have told me how to do that kind of stuff. But I was there almost within 2 hours of playing the game with like 15 other guys on a Ventrilo server, and they were explaining how things worked, and there was an element of risk because the ship that I couldn't replace that was given to me was potentially going to explode, and then it did. And I would never have learned any of that if they hadn't picked me up and taken me out there to do that. And I would have lost interest long before I would have found my way out there on my own.
So for you, you needed to taste the combat right away.
Well, I came to the game knowing that it was open-ended with a mix of PvP and PvE, right?
So you came for the PvP.
I was interested in both, right? But the way it was described to me was that there was a real element of risk involved in the PvP element of the game, and that's something which really interested me, but I knew was particularly unaccessible to me as a brand new player. And I agree with what Elise said, which is that there are other 0-0 or nullsec, whatever you call it, is not the only part of the game, and that there are other areas which need lots of love and attention too, and high sec is one and low sec is definitely another one, but none of them should be given preferential treat by CCP.
No, it seems what they're doing is they're clamping down on nullsec. They're clamping down on botting specifically, and the incredible money-making apparatuses that exist in nullsec, and making it harder to live there. And that is the boost to low sec and high sec, because the players that don't want to have it that hard can come back to high sec and do that same lifestyle, the AFK mining, let's call it, and watch a movie while they do it, but they're generating less money inside of high sec. So that's a boost to the high sec. So a lot of people ratting in high sec now.
But if they did the exact opposite, if they made the game somewhat easier in other parts of the game, this is going to sound counterintuitive. If they actually made the nullsec gameplay a little bit easier instead of harder, it would drive fewer people to the massive coalitions like the Imperium and Test and stuff. It would actually mean more people could go off on their own on smaller groups. That's part, I think, of some of the messages some of the CSM are bringing tomorrow.
Yeah, and there is a point to be made that potentially that's what some of these changes, like blackout and maybe other stuff, that's what they're trying to aim at. Making it more difficult for bigger groups to project in certain ways, particularly with capitals by the financial. But those things cut both ways, and are largely the impact of those. For the bigger the group, the bigger the offset in how much impact there is, because those larger groups will have the Ansiblex networks, and they'll have more people who will be able to do the sinos regardless of what ships they can be put on. And I can see I can see your point, and the way that those certain CSMs are working on trying to promote those points, but it's being done in a very blunt and heavy-handed way, and that's not right. And it's being rushed as well against this backdrop of chaos, which we're all supposed to just adapt to.
Well, chaos is the way that, to me, chaos, if you saw the Hilmar interview, is a concept that he got from the three-body problem, which is a book, and is basically these guys that when the three planets line up, it creates chaos on the Earth that is in the middle of all that. And so basically he was saying, like, so that's what we're going through. We're going to go through a period of earthquakes and volcanoes and just things that are terrifying that will disrupt normal life. And that's what chaos is supposed to be. But you're saying that in practicality, you're feeling it as rushed decisions that are easy to program. And so it's a low effort, high disruption thing that's going on to players.
Yes, for lack of anything more polished and refined to do.
Yeah.
That's pretty much exactly my point of view.
Yeah, so they're not developing new features that are interesting to make it harder. They're just saying, let's do this, let's do that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think there's any development going on at all here, is there? If you break this down and into what it really is, they're just sort of butchering parts of the game and removing them.
Well, today, as we do this, it's September 1st, as we're recording this interview. CCP has been back at their desk in Reykjavik for approximately 2 weeks. That's really. It takes them, they have a summer break, and they really do sort of detach from development efforts in a lot of ways during that. There are still some things they can do in the game, but real hardcore development, like you're describing, stops in the middle of summer in Reykjavik. So they came back the second week of August. It took a week to get their heads around being back and what are we going to do next, guys? And they plan their next sprints. They've had 2 weeks of development. We can't really see what they're doing at the moment. That's kind of where we are. We're blind. I'm looking forward to our CSMs getting a look at what they're thinking for the fall, if to the degree they're willing to share with them.
I agree that that there's not been much time to actually do something, but I don't think there's been. To me, what's being done here, it doesn't really sort of. It's hard to see that there's much thought behind it as well, right? I think it's just sort of like, oh, what would be really chaotic or disruptive? Let's turn this off. Okay, and that's what happened with local. And then like, okay, well, we hear a lot of chatter about capital proliferation and the umbrella. Okay, so what's the problem there? You can fit a Sino on an interceptor, which will go buzz around, and you can warp to a Sino, inhibit 100 immediately, and put your Sino up and bring in, pitch your umbrella, and that makes it very hard for anyone to be offensive inside your space. And that's kind of what brought the Sino change around. I think it's not so much about the lack of development time. It's about the lack of clarity and thinking and understanding about what they're doing and the actual effect that it will.
Well, what they're doing is making it harder for advanced players to win the game, quote unquote, or to dominate the game amongst even themselves. But it's not just you. It looks like wormholers are, I think, next, if it hasn't happened already, in that they're going to have it hard. They're going to have a harder time controlling their environment because they're supposed to be an environment that is hard to control, and they seem to have mastered it. So it looks like rolling and closing wormholes, and you can argue it's used for two purposes, to find content and also to defend yourself, is something that may go away. That's what it looks like. We don't know if that's actually going to happen.
I mean, that'd be great if that's a chain. Well, I don't want to say great, but I don't want wormholers to beat me up. But it would be good if CSB actually are looking into making changes to wormholes, because as of right now, if I had a magic wand and I could start an alliance from scratch with really good pilots from anywhere I wanted to, it would seem to me that the most sensible position to take would be a wormhole group of between 30 and 80 people that I could take out regularly. I could roll into any area of the game I wanted to, and I cannot be attacked. Like, I can't really be counterattacked that well without like this massive effort to get me out of my wormhole. And I can attack anyone I want with impunity and always attack like these Care Bears and these Ratters and these Crabbers without risking very much at all, right? So if you let this meta sit without changing it at all, then that's, I think, where everyone's going to start going to is to utilize wormholes to just attack these Crabbers and stuff like that. And that sort of mentality of not touching what seems to be the most profitable and pragmatic game style is kind of what got us into this mess to begin with, right? We made nullsec very, very safe with the citadels because we wanted people to use citadels. We didn't want people to just live in their stations and then out of passes and stuff like that. It seems to be like, okay, we want to give you an incentive to defend your space. The defender's going to have all these advantages, but that just sat and sat and sat. To the point where nullsec didn't become a spooky zone. It became an ISK printing machine. So, I mean, being able to, and I think we stress this all the time, being able to iterate on what the problems are before they become problems is something that EVE players desperately want to see out of their developer. And just talking about the CSM going on the summit, I'm really excited to see them provide the context for the metrics that CCP has, because as we were saying earlier, and I think as Hedliner was saying, CCP do have a lot of metrics, but because they're not allowed to play in these nullsec alliances, they don't really have any context for it, right? They can speculate, but they don't have to live that life every day.
But that bridge was burnt a long time ago when the T20 incident happened that keeps being referred to. God, it's over 10 years now, but that division of using CCP as a punching bag to say you're cheating and you're picking a side because your guys are in a corporation, in leadership in a corporation, is just not right. Well, they're not allowed to do it.
That's why there needs to be a dialogue around this, and that incident that you're referring to needs to very much be, by CCP and the players, be put to rest once and for all. It needs to be, as far as I'm concerned, they owned that, and they a long time ago. Yeah. And players, you've got now a whole, you're one or two generations of player down the line. You see them conditioned on Reddit or by their alliance, people in their alliances, and they fire that one out being like, oh, well, that this alliance cheated way back in the day because this and this. And it's like, well, this story has been passed down through generations of EVE players who have no idea what they're talking about because they just repeat what they were told. And it has this horrible, festering effect now, which is impacting the relationship that CCP has with its players. And I can see, they do take a lot of flack from the player base because of things like this, and it probably deters them from it. And that's why they need to open a dialogue with the people who are ultimately responsible in a game setting for the people that make up a large portion of the player base. You have a dialogue between major alliance leaders and CCP. Maybe that replaces the CSM. It improves the relations. It means that the alliance leaders don't start conditioning their members into thinking CCP is the enemy. And things can only get better from there.
So when I was on the CSM, one of those was your CSM 6, which is a long CSM ago. One of our One of our points that we wanted to do was we wanted CCP to play their game, and we were like, okay, we don't care about, as a group of players, we all collectively said we don't care about T20. We don't think you're going to cheat. We would rather risk you cheating and helping someone else than have you not playing the game because we think it's really functional. And it kind of just, I don't want to say it fell on deaf ears, but it went out there, it went out into the ether, and it just stayed there. And as Carneros was saying, one of the conversations you have with CCP that's different than the meetings is when you meet them after the fact for either dinner or drinks or anything like that, you can kind of get a different perspective. And what we were more or less told is that sort of, and we were told by people who no longer work there, so I don't know how true this is, but we were basically told that sort of push has to come from the players. The players have to, not demand, but the players have to really make it seem like they're okay with the devs playing in their high-end sandbox. And, I do think that we've kind of hit this weird area of the game where before the players would, lay out the red carpet for CCP devs, right? Like they would be like, oh, you're a CCP guy in my alliance. Oh, this is the best. I have a feeling now, ever since Aegis-Sov, I have a feeling that mood has soured to the point where even if CCPers were able to, I don't know if they would willingly submit themselves to the players on that level, right? We've seen that they've even, not all of them, but a lot of them have moved away from posting their own dev blogs. And I'm sure this is something that it's just a company policy and I'm reading too much into it. But the devs don't post really their own dev blogs anymore. It gets all put out by the communications team or the community team or something. And, it gets put out behind a unified face. And whenever there's backlash, they send poor Falcon out to take the beating. And that's kind of how it went. Back in the day, you had Fozzie making really fun posts and dev blogs that, as they competed for who had the most upvotes on the forums. But I mean, I don't know. And I don't know what the solution to that is. I'm just like pointing out the problem. I don't know if there is a solution for that.
Well, one piece of advice I would have is alliance leaders, don't let your guys just constantly slag CCP on comms, on voice comms, because no one wants to play incognito in your corp or your alliance if every time they get on a fleet, they're going to hear young punks saying CCP sucks. That, if you want your group to be open to having a dev working there, try to be more polite. Maybe that's a naive thing for me to say.
I think it might be.
All right.
For the EVE Online group, that might be a hard pill to swallow, right? It does seem that
we can't even get people to stop in public.
That makes perfect sense. I'm just telling you. That makes perfect sense.
If we can't even get people to stop saying stuff in public, or at least like, hey, consider different things instead of having, I think it's what Hedliner said. You've been given this information that T20 is a big deal and should never be forgotten. And now you're just spouting it out like you lived through it, and you didn't. You just got handed that piece of information and you've been told when to use it, and you're just hitting F1 and using it against the company whenever you see the opportunity. That's in public. Imagine in private. Or
it's a top-down thing for sure in that respect. But then again, as well, like you won't get that without, on the CCP end, some kind of demonstration of willingness to have a dialogue. Because if why would any of these guys who have certain access to grind change the messaging and the narrative that they push down onto their members to keep them chipping away in the same direction that they want them to go in, if it was all going to be for nothing, right?
So one of the key things that makes EVE Online super unique, and I think has been true of EVE Online since I've played and can explain a lot of the player actions, is that the part of the EVE Online experience is to commiserate over a shared misery, right? A shared misery of something you had to endure, like mining in a Dominix or something like that, or getting blapped by a Titan, or getting doomsdayed by the enemy and just feeling like you had no control over your death. Like just part of EVE, it's something that we all share. And I think at some level, it creates some sort of resentment when CCP comes and says, we want to make it easier for the new player and we want to focus on keeping them around. Because a lot of the players are like, hey, how come we didn't have this when I was growing up? Where were these skill point things when I was a new player? And it does create like this weird sense of resentment from players.
I have a theory that I hesitate to bring up. And that theory is that CCP actually has an agenda and an objective for where they're going with all this. But they've decided that it won't work as well if they tell the agenda to the players. And that's why it looks like they're doing crazy stuff that doesn't make sense. If they were trying to fight bots, they would tell the players and we would all get behind the effort. If they were trying to fix the economy, they would tell the people and they would keep going with that. I actually think there's another reason, and they don't want to tell the players.
Well, of course, they're putting a lot of pressure on bots, Carneros. I mean, they basically shut down their ability to work, not only in nullsec, but in highsec too. They can't function in highsec with these new, what are they, recons from Draclavians.
Yes, but they didn't follow up with the messaging portion of that, and they didn't do that for a reason. Anyway, maybe we'll learn more at CSM Summit.
Wait, what's the reason? You don't know the reason, but
I have a theory, and I don't want to say it because it's probably completely wrong, and B, it might hurt things to say it. So I don't want to do that. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't thought this all out.
You're a grown up. Okay.
I'm say grown up. Go ahead, Elise.
I will say that so it's really hard to be critical of certain changes and not seem like you're super doom and gloom about it. I will say to balance out some of the negativity that there are more than a handful of players that I've talked to. So there's a non-insignificant number of players that are saying EVE Online right now is the most fun they've ever had playing a video game. Right? Either they're doing high-sec incursions, or not high-sec incursions, but the drifter incursions, which are basically high-sec incursions, or they're living out of Wormhole doing cool roaming Wormhole things, or they're taking out gangs of like 10 to 15 people of players that they played with back in the day, right? So they're like, I say this before, that these are players that would play maybe 50 hours a week. They're not doing that anymore. They're down to 5 hours a week, but they came back from nothing, from not playing in order to do this. So it's not all doom and gloom. And a lot of people that are listening are probably saying, hey, I love this chaos thing. I love the tiers of these nullsecers, because they've been having it all for too long, and now they get a taste of what it's like. So it's more of that shared misery type thing. But yeah, then there is a large portion of the players that really enjoy the changes that they're making.
And some of them are saying that though. But like Rick Javix, wonderful guy, he says that in every other tweet. But does he really believe that, or is he just playing a game online?
I think he believes. I know Asherathi also super believes it. He's having like the time of his life. He's never had more fun in EVE Online than he's having right now. And because I talked to him not too long ago, and like I don't know, and his group is also doing the same.
His group is growing, and he's having a great time.
Neither of them are in nullsec either, though.
That is true. They are feeling the boon of a lot of these nullsecers that are leaving and maybe going to low sec or high sec to get their fill of a little bit less risky.
But these are a couple of examples of great guys who are applying themselves to EVE and have applied themselves to EVE and are enjoying these changes. Let's look at the game overall. Let's use this as a transition for a moment to look at PCUs and stuff. Maestro McLeod, could we ask you for the graphics, please? Is this healthy for the game?
What are we seeing?
Let's approach that.
For the podcast listeners, what are we seeing?
We can't see them yet, but we're going to see some PCU numbers, and I'll talk through whatever he puts up on the stage. Okay, now he's put something up here, and I'm trying to zoom in enough so that I can actually see what it says. He's looking at 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. And you can see the peak concurrency each day. I think actually of those each week. It might be the peak concurrency each week of people on the Tranquility server. So by peak concurrency, he means players who logged into the game, clicked onto a character, logged into a particular character on an account, and were online at the same time. And this is what the Tranquility server is managing: a live connection to your character at the same time. How many people? So there's a dotted white line across the middle that shows 35,000 players connected at the same time to this server. This ignores the Serenity server in China, and this ignores any test servers, and it ignores anyone who's logged into the character select screen but didn't go all the way to the game. 35,000 on average was peak concurrency best on a Sunday at EU time zone prime right after dinner, roughly speaking. And as you could see, there were times in 2016 where we dipped quite well below, and it was under 30,000 even for peak concurrency. And then January 2017, you see places where it was well above 40,000 and approaching 50,000. And then thank you for the magic red lines being drawn in there to help. Those of you who are watching this on video have an advantage here. Thank you. If you're listening in the other room with your wireless headset, run back to the screen and look at what he's drawing. Okay. Then we roll forward to 2018, and 35,000 peak concurrencies is a regular thing happening. Boom, 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 boom. In the summer again of 2018, you see it dip below again. That's summer doldrums. You can see each time there's a summer doldrums. And that's normal. That's actually not an Eve thing. That's a video game thing. All online connected worlds like that have this every summer. And it's a thing. Mm. Now roll forward to 2019. Look at the summer doldrums in 2019. Dear Lord, it looks like the Grand Canyon. Well, it's more dramatic than the others. So yeah, you see, that's a combination of Age of Chaos and summer doldrums. That's what that is. And there's some theories that say also that in the last week, there's also an effect from, say, Warcraft Classic and some other things going on in the world.
Let's remember that in 2011, when you had the mass people leaving the game and you had CCP say, we've made a mistake, I don't know if they said we made a mistake, but I don't know. There was definitely a turn to say, we're going to fix the game that you guys have been complaining about. That Skyrim came out at the same time. So it was people saying, oh, this expansion that hit didn't deliver. If it's delivering in the wrong direction, I don't want to be a part of it. And this is great new game that will totally fulfill my living in a big space fantasy. So I'm going to go do that instead. And I think there's some parallels here, but I don't think they are completely exact parallels.
I mean, if you're talking about the WoW Classic element of this, I think it kind of almost neatly underscores the issue that a lot of the players are working through right now, which is one thing which Elise touched on earlier is that we have this idea as a player base of the kind of we all collectively enjoy reminiscing about the together, and then once we've done that, we go on to talking about how great things were playing the game X number of years ago. And WoW Classic essentially allows you to go and play the game that you may reminisce about being great a number of years ago. And I don't know why kind of CCP maybe they're not aware of that kind of player thought process, but I think it's personally from a business perspective, it's quite risky to upset as many apple carts as they have at a time where something that allows people to go back and revisit something that they remembered to be fun quite easily is coming along. I don't know.
It is bad timing for CCP. I'll admit that they have no control over what the competition does, but yeah, this is an unfortunate
I don't know. I find it completely ironic that people are like, we want Eve to go back to when there was no SOV. That's when they were discussing the SOV system, what it should be like. They're like, no SOV, no SOV. And Fozzie, in an interview that I did with him, said, I don't think people can actually handle it. If we ever get back to no SOV, it'll have to be done in a very incremental way over a period of years.
Before we go that far, let's look at the next slide, though, please, McLeod. This one has nothing to do with peak concurrency or monthly active users or anything about humans. This one is about Plex. And it's not about Plex pricing. It's about Plex volumes. So the volume of sales of Plex. It only looks at the region of the Forge, which includes JITA and the Perimeter Keepstar, and honestly, the majority of Plex trade in New Eden occurs in the region of the Forge. So let's take a look at this chart together. What you'll see is it starts in, I guess this is the last 12 months. So it starts September 1st of 2018, and it rolls forward. It doesn't go all the way to September 1st of 2019 because we don't have full data for the last couple days. So we opted to cut it off without and not show the days for which we don't have full data because that's not appropriate. So you can see the up and downliness of it is either it's a very jagged line, and part of the jagged is weekends have more trade volume than weekdays. So it's not a straight line. And you can see a few places we have marked on there where a Plex sale has affected the volume of trade. That's the pink shading. My apologies to anyone who's colorblind. But you can see there's a pink shading on the spikes that are caused by 15% off and 10% off Plex sales. Then you can see green shading. Green shading is when there's another kind of promotion that's not a Plex sale, like a skill point weekend or the 13 days of Eve at the holidays where we gave you a gift every day. So the green shading causes causes just sort of like a peak in activity in Eve or peak in logins, and that can translate into Plex traffic. Or for example, if they gave 2 levels of gifts and said, look, by the way, if you activate Omega on your account, even on the last day, we'll give you all the Omega gifts as well as all the Alpha gifts. So that can sometimes trigger a little bit more activity there. So you see mini spikes on the green. And then there's a red line where the blackout starts. There's a fairly stable amount of Plex trade overall if you average it out till you get to that red blackout line. And then one of the things you see, and mind you, there were Rorqual nerfs before that blackout, and still Plex trading seemed to be relatively even. But at the blackout line, you see the trend line going down. Yes, a Plex sale and a skilling spree and a skill point weekend still affects things. 2 skill point weekends, they did them in close proximity because they're trying to keep these numbers up as high as possible. But you still see a trend line down. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so they're trying to keep the numbers up kind of makes it sound like they're trying to disguise the fact that numbers are falling. I think you're trying to invite players back to an environment that they've been asking for a long time. That's what it seems like to me. And if I could finish my previous point that I wasn't able to finish to Hedliner, it seems like a lot of people are saying, hey, we want to go back to the way Eve was when it was, there was a lot of roaming and it was hard. And yet when they make the environment that way, people take off to WoW because WoW is doing just that, right? The vanilla WoW used to be on a PvP server pretty brutal. So I think it's kind of ironic. People are leaving for WoW what CCP is trying to deliver in EVE Online.
And if that is the case, then there's a point to be made or a question to be asked about the delivery, because WoW Classic is something which has been prepared and refined and carefully deployed over a long time. People have been talking about this for months now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Months and months and months. And it was actually an ongoing joke among some of the FCs that are less active at the moment because of various reasons, some of them in-game related, about, the line would often come out, well, I'm just waiting for WoW Classic, and then by the time I'm bored of that, it'll be winter, and hopefully something in Eve will have... whereas we'll bucket them all together and call them the chaos changes, just came in a quick fire kind of, okay, this is happening now, this is happening now, this is happening now. Let's see where we end up with it. They're two very different methods of delivery.
Well, I think it was clearly telegraphed as far back, and that's not very far, to Eve Australia or Eve Down Under, where he said, yeah, nullsec is stagnant and it needs to be terrified. And then a few months later, you have drifters, then blackout, then now Sino changes, then maybe wormhole change. But you see succession after succession of fundamental things that we depended on in nullsec being changed that would completely alter the way that we have to do business.
I think CCP Rise added something really interesting when we had a chat with him. It was the last week or the week before, where he said now CCP there's this mood that nothing is sacred. Because before it was, well, Sinos are these things that we're not allowed to touch because they've been this way forever, blah, blah, blah. But now it's well, we can change how everything works. There's everything that's on the table.
I think they mean that literally too.
Yeah.
Well, Hilmar reinforced that because he said that again during FinFest. So I think they're ready to put in some incentives. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think they've realized they kind of reached the level that they were trying to reach. And they did. My God, they slammed ISK making in nullsec. And yeah, Plex prices fall because you had a bunch of accounts that were your ISK makers that you no longer need because they're not able to operate. So you shut those accounts down. Plex sales would probably drop because demand drops.
I don't know, but I'm not making a point about why Plex traffic is dropping. I'm just making a point that it's dropping. I would, if I had to attribute it to something, I would say its engagement is dropping. And I would say that engagement is dropping unevenly across the board by time zone, and it's dropping more in US time zone. But
that's curious, yeah.
Anyway.
By the way, I wanted to ask earlier, Hedliner, I don't know if you know this, or Elise, do Russians complain about CCP as much as Americans do?
We used to have a guy who was our local Eve RU translator. I'm pretty sure Hedliner remembers him, as he's given him quite a few headaches before. Tyler Durden. He was a guy in PL that would basically... He stopped playing for a while, but we kept him around because he would translate stuff from the Eve RU forums. And they hate basically everything from what I can gather. They're a very negative bunch. They hate change, but they're also super passionate at the same time, right? So whenever there's a Russian Eve meet, they show out in droves and they bend the ear of CCPers. But from what I gather, they hate everything.
That's awesome. Okay.
All right, let's drop this for now, though. Kenshin. Does anyone know why Kenshin moved to Initiative Mercenaries? Does anyone have any behind-the-scenes info on this?
I heard that they did not... I heard it was a leadership-related thing. That's what a friend of mine who lives in Australia told me, who plays within the alliance that they were in. Not in that corp, but in another corp in the same alliance, or their former alliance. It said that there was some kind of...
wow.
Friction is one thing, but there wasn't an alignment on certain things, and they had an offer from the initiative, and they chose to take it.
Well, heavens to Betsy. Okay, let me ask: can someone explain to the audience what they're famous for and why anyone would know their name?
No one's taking that bait.
Okay, you don't have to.
When Asher had his deployment to fight Guardians of the Galaxy, he had I guess he had some alts in Kenshin, director level alts, and he used them, or they approached him and they flipped a lot of Sov, and they had some really, I don't want to say cringy, but if you are playing a narrative where you're at war with someone, you could definitely get some voice recordings from their corp and call it cringy if you wanted to. Like you could spin it that way. So that for a while, one summer, Asher and his deployment kind of made them the butt of every joke in New Eden for a while. And so I think that was there. There are some Microsoft memes, but I hear that guy is actually not in Kenshin anymore. But
that was what I was wondering, if he wasn't there anymore.
Well, sorry, wasn't their leader the guy that lost to Nyx because he let a British female sit in it? Was that Kenshin or somebody else?
I mean, Blade Randall is a wild guy who's been around for a real long time.
I think it was him.
And he is definitely a wild dude. I have memories of him when he was in Morsis Mihi. He just went off one day, and we were like, is this guy nuts, or is he just playing us for fools? I still don't know the answer to that. I think he was just playing us for fools, personally. But he made some wild decision. He moved Morsis Mihi to, and this is going way back in the Wayback Machine, he moved them to Delve to try and carve out a piece of the pie there, and it lasted for like 2 weeks because no one went with him, really.
That was Thunderdome.
Yeah, it was awful. They just got stomped. They went from stomping fire to stomping fire, it seemed. But
yeah, I was in Nully when they arrived. They crashed a war that was happening between Red Alliance and Nully Segunda for Delve. And
it didn't work out too well for them.
Yeah, it didn't. We thought, oh no, they ended up folding fast. But there was an incident, and I hope it's this guy because I don't want to put it on him. But he was very much embarrassed because the logs were published, and he was basically saying like, "Oh, you want to this woman? You want to sit in my Nyx? Okay, you can sit in it. I really like your accent. British accents really do it for me." And then next thing you know, she takes off with his ship and totally steals it. And I think it was that guy because it was associated with a certain leader, and then I think it was Kenshin. But that was a funny moment, but I hope it was attributed correctly.
I mean, if not, I'm sure it's a great Eve story too. Like, hey, you got backstabbed because you sound cool. But yeah, I saw a lot of people incredibly surprised by this move. I know on the Eve subreddit, a lot of people were like, "Oh, Initiative! Why would you dare take someone like Kenshin? They're so far below you." But props to Initiative. They're proving time and time again, and this is something that I think PL defined really well and kind of set this as a precedent. I don't want to boast too much, but I think Hedliner would probably agree with me. Is like, you can take any group in EVE Online. If you hold every group accountable to what they did previously, you're going to find yourself with 5 members that you can play with, and that's about it, right? Like, you can't just hold people accountable for where they used to be and judge them based on their past alliances. Every corp, especially a corp as old as
past transgressions, right? Including ourselves, including you.
Everyone's been in a corp that they're ashamed of, right? And if you, I was in a bunch of corps that I'm ashamed of, but it's okay. I grew out of it. But yeah, story. So you can't just hold that against them. So this is a great move. Like, props to Initiative for not turning their nose up against someone from GOTG that the average player might think it's below them.
Quick funny story. When I was leaving CCP and I could leave EVE University and go into nullsec for the first time, I had a conversation with Shadu, and he said, "Well, here are some of your options at nullsec." And then he said, in the end, he goes, "I wouldn't go to PL, though, because if you do, it'll be a black mark on your record, and people will hold it against you for the rest of your career." Like, really? I would really expect him to say that.
My boyhood child in EVE Online was to join PL. That was like all I wanted to do because they're so good at the Alliance tournament. They're just flawless. Yeah. And I thought, those are the big dogs. I want to join them. And then I got to know them.
Yeah. We need to wind down, though.
All right.
We've been going a long time. We need to wind down. it's time for our tips, Eve tips. So this is how we close out instead of doing shout outs.
Something you may not know.
Something you may not know.
I'll go ahead and start because mine is these don't have to be the most advanced things that we can think of because it only helps a certain set of people. So sometimes we're going to talk about something you may not know, even if you're like a beginner or medium player. And mine, and it doesn't have to be necessarily in the game, it just has to be something related to EVE Online that makes sense. So my thing is, you may not know that WoW Classic is out. And it is taking a toll on all MMOs for sure because it was such a juggernaut in its day. And people always talk about vanilla. And so basically they've released the same game they had, I think, in 2007 again. And they're going to update it I think they have a schedule out. So you're going to be able to relive with your friends or with your child the experiences you had on, with WoW. I think the novelty may wear off for some people, but if you're seeing numbers dip on the PCU, it's not just blackout or bots that have been wiped out. It's actually this other game that has gravitational pull. A lot of players overlap. Now, here's the thing that people may not know: if you said you were a WoW player, it was considered an omission that you were a terrible EVE player because we in EVE Online didn't want any WoW players. WoW was too easy, too colorful. This was EVE Online. It's dark and it's really rough here. Completely different player base. But now, maybe those guys have left.
Yeah, go back to WoW. It's the insult of the felt like a decade.
Was, right?
You would say to if you beat someone instead of anything you would say, you just be like, "Oh, go back to WoW. You suck." It's basically the modern day equivalent of get good.
Okay, I'm not sure what that was a tip, but I'll go with the next one.
No, it's something you may not know.
Something you may not know. Okay. So this week there was a handy incursion spawn that happened nearby, and I got to do a little bit of incursion farming, which is good because, like Hedliner, I'm also broke in EVE, and I could use a little bit of ISK every now and then. So I got out there in my ship. It was good. Things that you can and cannot do in an incursion system. I just wanted to tell you, you can light a normal or a new industrial Sino as soon as those are in the game. You can light those in an no, you cannot. You cannot light those in an incursion system. Neither of them. You can light a covert Sino, though. You cannot jump to a Feralux Cynosural beacon in an incursion system. But you can use an Ansiblex jump gate in both directions. Who knew? Crazy. I love it. You can also travel safely through them in a capsule. Just have to avoid capsuleers because your buddies will eat you. Diamond rats, drifters, and probably Triglavians, but I haven't yet seen what happens when a Triglavian invasion is in and an incursion cross. I don't know. Probably the 3-body problem happens all over again, worse. Just so those are some tips of things that you can and cannot do in an incursion system.
All right, mine is.
Did you literally pew 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 there, Carneros?
I mean, if you don't make sound effects in EVE Online, you're doing it wrong.
Exactly.
Right. Got to make up for no sound.
And we did have PvP in our incursion. That happened.
Yeah.
So my little tip will be if you're flying a Tech 3 destroyer and you just want to travel around fast because maybe you screwed up and you left your fleet behind because you were on the phone or you just weren't paying attention or you got distracted by a YouTube video, as I have done several times, you can align a little bit faster and get into warp a little bit faster if you initiate your warp in a mode that's not propulsion and then swap to propulsion mode. Because then it'll increase your agility or rather your inertia, instantly. And then while you're in warp, just swap it back to defense mode or sharpshooter mode, so you can prepare yourself for the next jump. Because it takes a little while. There's a 2-second, 3-second cooldown between swapping modes.
Anyone else have a tip? All
Well,
right,
there's only one more person.
Dear Lord, Matterall.
No, but we didn't tell Hedliner, so we can't ambush him.
This is not D.
frantically
Martin
trying
Rose.
to think of something.
Yeah, sorry, man. You can pass. It's totally fine.
Well, actually, no. I think I'm looking through the settings window in the escape menu now, trying to see if does that capital navigation window still exist? Is that still a thing that no one ever knew?
I think so. Control Shift N, right? That was the how to pull it up.
I don't know about this.
Yeah,
You're going to teach me something.
Super advanced.
So, there used to be an unbound shortcut to open a window which would show you like jump ranges to everything which was within range of the ship that you were flying. If it had a jump drive, it would show you, and you could sort it by light years or by a system name.
I'm docking now to check.
Wow.
I can't actually see it listed here anymore, but it used to be a thing, and no one ever knew about it.
It would also show you all of the beacons that you could jump to. So if you were ratting, it was really nice to have open, because you could just like right click and jump to a beacon without having to go through the drop down thing.
I'm not getting anything with a Control Shift N.
It was Headliner's right. It was unbound. So you have to specifically go in and bind it to something.
Well, we'll look for that.
We'll tell you next week if it still exists.
Yeah. Thank you, because I want to learn this. That's cool.
It definitely used to be there.
We'll call it the Headliner window.
If it's not around, I wonder when it went away, because this is the first I've ever heard of that. And that seems critical if you're a capital pilot. Now it's on the new map. You can see what's within your jump range, but it doesn't have a lot of information.
All right. Yeah, you can just undock in a cap and right click on your capacitor, and it used to show you absolutely no. It still shows me everything, even the things I can't jump to. No,
all right.
Maybe it. Yeah. Okay.
All right, Carneros.
Yeah, go for it.
Time's up. Go ahead and summarize.
Okay, thank you for joining us for Coffee with Hedliner. We had a great conversation, talked about all kinds of stuff all over the map. Thank you to our guest, Hedliner, head of Pandemic Legion. Actually, he's the CEO of Sniggerdly, and he's the current active director, we might say, of Pandemic Legion. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'm chief of the vote.
Well, great. Fantastic. Thank you to our panel, Elise, Randolph, Habitual, Euthanasia.
Yeah. Also, I don't want to cut you short, but it does exist. I found it. It's under window. It's called Jump Navigation.
Oh my God. Yeah, so, 60th actually said that in chat too. Awesome. Jump navigation window, bind it to your keys if you're a capital pilot. Excellent tip, Hedliner. Excellent tip.
This is fantastic. I'm doing that next as soon as we're done. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Carneros, thanks for running the show. We are about to raid Braun USMC. So if you're around watching live, stick around. And don't forget, we have content all day long every week. Sorry, not all day long, all week long, every day. Totally opposite of what I said. And you can catch that on YouTube, but we're also releasing it as a podcast. But it's going to be separate than this. And that is called Today in EVE Online, where we take on whatever the day's issue is every morning. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We love to see you guys show up here. Also in Talking in Stations Discord, we like to see you guys talk in there. We will see you next week on Talking in Stations.